Pettitt again, and now we are talking about Chapter 30, the Federal Trade Commission. And my friend Thomas has stupidly agreed to read the chapter and discuss it with me. So, Thomas, I'm pretty sure you should get a hobby or something. But thank you for being here. As I have been asking, because most of my friends are vibrating with something to say, what are you coming in hot with? Let's start there.
Oof. So first of all, I think,
That's the subtitle. The
yeah.
subtitle, Panic 2025. Oh,
Well, the thing is, yeah, I'll start with a couple things. One is when I was reading this, I remembered that I finished off my college undergrad senior year by taking a debate course, and I remember actually doing a final project on reading about antitrust law and specifically tied with Apple. And so I was coming into this sort of having that mental preparedness of, okay, I'm going to read, really nitty-gritty details about antitrust law and to be prepared to read something heavy and filled with a lot of citations, which this didn't have.
oh yeah, who needs like references? There's lots of footnotes, but they're usually pretty self-promotion based.
Yeah, and so when I read stuff like this and look at the author, and I try my very best to do a deep dive on the author, what they're all about, what they do, what they've written in the past. And so our author here, Brendan Carr, Brendan Carr,
Mhm.
um, he is, no, that's not the right one. I'm on the wrong page. What is his name? What is our Brendan? That's not, I'm looking at the FCC. I'm at the wrong. Anyway, regardless. So the author is a really odd, and I know it's ad hominem, but he spent like a few years in his career really interested in revenge porn law. And I thought it was really odd that he would go from writing about
This
really,
is Adam Kendob.
yes, Adam, good old Adam. That's what I meant.
Mhm.
So he went from writing about that to the Federal Trade Commission. So it's really odd to me why he's so interested in the Federal Trade Commission in the first place, just because of his background has been not in the Federal Trade Commission or anything uh, related too much in the financial sector. And so it really shows you when you read um, someone who contributes to an ideological piece like this, that they're moving away from writing in a legal fashion that requires again citations and personal accountability to something that's just sort of uh, reflective of an odd manifesto that is all over the place. So that's where I'll begin.
Well, I think it's a great place to begin. My research on the author, and I'm sorry that I didn't catch it when you said Brendan. He's the Federal Election Commission,
Right.
who's the current chair. But there's too many authors, and they all sound like white fraternity men. But that's
Yeah.
my digression. What I did see that might possibly
That'll-
be a connection between his experience with revenge porn and how he got here is the Federal Trade Commission uh, supposedly also looks at, we're getting way ahead of ourselves in the chapter, but contracts with children,
Right.
antitrust enforcement,
Right.
big tech and antitrust,
Mm.
and not not doing something like socially that would be very popular for the news right now. But there is a very high correlation, I would assume, between those that utilize revenge porn tactics with sex trafficking, child trafficking, things like that. And so the connection did seem very disjointed to me, but more like maybe he was just sitting a cubicle over and
Yeah.
someone,
Yeah.
like it's close. But
No, that's great. And that's actually where he uses more of his references in
mhm.
citations is in the section about social media. But other than that, outside that, it's just um
Opinion.
predictive without any really strong data or, you
Mhm.
know, direction.
Yeah, who needs that?
No.
Um, if we kind of time out and back up, so the Federal Trade Commission, I'm going to admit, is not something I have ever thought about.
Hmm. Hmm.
I don't know if you had said the FTC, I think I've heard of that, but I don't know that I would have known what the letters meant. And I certainly wouldn't know what the department does, let alone how a Heritage Foundation wants to change it.
Right.
So, in theory, this is where we're talking about antitrust, mergers, pricing, monopolies, right?
Mhm.
Like when Kroger wants to buy all those grocery stores. Kroger wanted to buy, I think it was Albertsons. Maybe I'm getting this backwards. Why that could or couldn't happen is now we're in the FTC world, right? Of creating monopolies. Now, side note, one of the other things I hadn't really thought about was the quote unquote too big to fail mantra that came up in 2008 when banks were being bailed out. And I did think it was interesting that being too big to fail somehow is different than having a monopoly, which would be too big because there's not enough
Mhm.
competition in the market. So if you're too big to fail, but you're still supporting competition, great. But if you're too big that there's no longer competition, bad. The
Oh,
FTC
right.
is the person who decides good, bad.
Right, right. And too big to fail means that, the government says, we can't allow you to fail, so we're going to make sure that we can be there for you.
Mhm, mhm. There's inside of this department also really clarifies some of the other chapters have alluded to this that the evolution of the definitions of business or what the business what corporate or business responsibility is um, according to the Heritage Foundation should not include anything related to equity, should
Right,
not include
right,
anything related to climate change, but more
right.
fundamentally is, and I've said this in a number of the recordings, but Milton Friedman is the one who came up with shareholders, right? Return on investment is the number one responsibility. But it
And
was in the 80s that Edward Freeman came up with stakeholders as the shift of responsibility for corporate world. And that is absolutely not what they want to do. No, no stakeholders. We're not talking about anybody except for return on investment to shareholders. And the
right,
fact that that was focused here, I thought was also very interesting because I think the monopoly too big to fail, antitrust merger, pricing, price gouging, that kind of stuff were interesting kind of field goal posts in thinking about the only focus is on the shareholders.
right,
Um,
right. Exactly. And I when I first read this chapter and was going through the introduction, or his many introductions, I it just I had to laugh to myself because of course I was reading something recently about Milton Friedman and the fact that, people like to look at him as this founder of modern day capitalism and Adam writes in this chapter, he uses a sentence twice because he apparently he liked it so much. He said, the
or
business,
bad editing, highly possible.
yes, exactly.
Bad editing.
So, and I just have to laugh because there's so much narrow like perceptions in the way that these chapters are written that you just have I'm just astounded by the fact that the irony isn't caught. So for example,
Or the hypocrisy.
right, right. Um, Adam writes, the business of American business is business, not ideology. And he
Mhm.
uses that twice. And when you read it again, the business of American business is business, not ideology. So there's a weird like so for when you quote Milton Friedman, you automatically communicate in the message that you're arguing for that capitalism is the best thought process. That's an ideology. And so the fact that you can't recognize that you're arguing from a position of ideology and just calling it business is really it's frustrating.
Yeah, what is interesting, I mean, I think that makes a really good point, is that if you turn capitalism into instead of an ideology, you turn it into a functional definition of this thing, meaning that there's no other option or ways of doing anything. We don't talk about cooperatives or any, nope, just
Yeah.
this version of capitalism is what we do. What I do think is also interesting, and this is my attempt to be charitable, so careful. But when we talk about what they refer to as the extremist liberal Marxist agenda, I think that there's a lot of progressives that do something very similar too, is that instead of seeing it as an ideology of, I'm going to make some suggestions, that like we care about generations far, far after us. People, I feel responsible for people I will never meet.
Mm,
That is an ideology. But a lot of times I think because it's such a deeply held ideology, it becomes the way that we should
mm,
be making decisions. But I think you're bringing up a very good point, is that the way is filtered through an ideology that I ascribe to. Yeah.
yes.
Um, Even if we talk about nonpartisan civil servants who are loyal to the president's agenda is usually fueled by a particular ideology that has been articulated into a few priorities. And those priorities are then enacted by civil servants who, by virtue of doing that, cannot be nonpartisan.
Right. And and it's ideological to suggest that um the only purpose of business is to filter out anything to do with social cohesiveness, right? It's just about profit. And so if you're arguing that, you
And the
know,
profit of a few, that's important to mention.
right,
It's not egalitarian, everyone has an option to get these profits.
right. And he does write in there that, he supports small businesses. He uses the term salubrious, but he really doesn't go into why. He just says, oh, it's a great foundation for the American market. And
The salubrious word, which I had to Google because I've never seen that word before in my life. I assumed that it was like a Wordle Scrabble
I'm
moment.
like, oh my God. Geez. Gosh,
um,
I'm a small
okay,
business owner and now I feel salubrious, right? I feel like I'm this great foundation to the free market.
you are the American way. I am also the American way. Do you have
Right?
employees?
Exactly. You what?
Do you have employees?
No, just me.
See, I also don't have employees, so we're not quite good enough.
Uh-oh, we're too social.
Right,
We're
right.
too moral.
Right. I don't have employees because I don't make enough money to give them what I would consider a
Yes.
living wage and the benefits
No, we
that
don't
would
have
represent my company.
shareholders.
Right. I have dogs. That counts too.
Hey, that's a good shareholder.
I mean, they are completely dependent on me for I am dependent on them for keeping my feet warm and they're dependent on me for dog food. Okay, we've gotten lost. Let's focus. Okay, so one of the interesting things that came up in the Constitution that I'm surprised I didn't know about is called the vesting clause, the independence or vesting clause, in Article 2 of the Constitution. So when I use the word vesting, I think about the Russian dolls, which are actually nesting dolls, not vesting dolls. I just want to own that these are two very different things. But the vesting clause in Article 2, Section 1 of the United States Constitution states that the President of the United States has the executive power to text, the actual text is the executive power shall be vested in the President of the United States of America. The vesting clause establishes the executive office and the role of the President as its head. The President's powers include being commander in chief, which means commander in chief of the military. They have pardoning power, which can grant pardons for offenses against the United States, except in cases of impeachment. I think that might come up later, not in this document, but next year probably. that you cannot pardon something that is related to impeachment. If it's determined to be impeachment, I bet that that's a
Mm,
clause that's not there. Anyway, appointments to treaty making powers. The president has the power to make appointments and shape foreign policy initiatives, i.e., their foreign policy agenda. And duty to execute laws. The president is responsible for ensuring that laws are faithfully executed, at least the ones you like. I mean,
well, and
um,
I mean, it highlights the main, and maybe that's a really big, and you've read the whole project
sure
really
did.
well from what I've gathered. And I've noticed that I feel like is one of the biggest golden threads throughout the whole project is reinforcing this idea that we need to sort of have this um, loyalist foundation of, okay, the only way that we're going to reform or change or make these departments the way that we want to is to have a president in power to appoint loyalist positions
Mhm.
because of what you were just talking about, this vesting authority to say, okay, well, I don't really like this, so let's get rid of the person in charge and put someone in charge from the top. And
Right.
so,
And on that note, I want to make sure that this gets noted because I've heard about this in the news, but this vesting and this loyalty, this priority of being loyal to the president's agenda versus a nonpartisan, kind of holistic, democratic, small d
right,
focus or agenda, that's an ideology. We don't do those. We only do this thing. Um, the the interim appointments the theory that they're operating with is that an interim does not have to get confirmed by the Senate and would serve until the end of the congressional period. So if you put in an interim, they have the job for at least 2 years. And if the main job description is loyalty to the agenda, that is, I'm going to call it a loophole that we should probably try to tighten up somehow, but we might be a little late. Okay, so next piece they're just going to talk about.
hmm
So the ESG initiatives, which is
right,
environmental, social prioritization of corporate social responsibility, obviously is completely under attack. So abortion, racial equality, climate change, um, transgender people being real, and LGBT agenda, like that's like a given, right? That this is
right,
not good. So what I thought was interesting though, and this goes back to the hypocrisy about an ideology, is that the idea that if a company voluntarily signs up to follow ESG standards that are then they're held accountable to on an annual basis, they're doing that because they want it to be part of their brand or reputation, which to me sounds like a choice in a business, and a business gets to choose what it wants to do. But their
right,
positioning on it through the FTC is that it's laundering brand reputations for not doing it. So then,
right.
it's again, there's this constant trope of picking winners and losers, which is
hmm
almost language. Winners and losers pronounced differently is like doing it the right way versus doing it a way that society says is the wrong way.
hmm
That is not winners and losers. That is like following expectations, social expectations, or not following
Right.
social expectations. But I'm getting into semantics. But I
Well,
think
no, yeah.
the laundering thing was interesting uh, under the guise of an ideology. Go, I'm talking
So
too much.
yeah, no, and so I want to make this point really critical and evaluative of, I guess you could say, two spectrums of brand laundering, I guess you could say. So as a young DEI professional, right now I've been reading through Lily Zhang's DEI Deconstructed book, and
Great book.
it is a really great book. And it points to lots of different types of ways that DEI can be cheapened. And so we know that there are organizations that use DEI in a performative way. Okay, that is very factual. In this case, it's kind of trying to make that point, but Adam is making it in a way where he's demonizing it to a really strange realm that again isn't, there's no citations, like, so I want to tell you on page 873, the bottom of page 873, he says that both ESG and DEI is a type of reputational laundering to avoid enforcement of potentially criminal activity. And
Mhm.
of course, no citation, because that, why would you need citation when you're accusing DEI of covering up criminal activity? I rhetorically, this whole section is making it sound like it's some sort of equivalent to money laundering. I mean, it's just
Mhm.
it's so um outlandish. And again, no citations, no data. It's just the key word there is potentially. And so you don't even know how the author is making predictions about the negative consequences of ESG and
Right.
DEI work.
Yeah, great point. And particularly regarding private equity, my
Right.
understanding is that by picking winners and losers, those that are winning, meaning that they seem to be following the social norms or social expectations that may not be laws, because they may be guided by social guidance or role models, and people may feel peer pressured to follow those role models because that's how the free market works, right? Is that the buyer, the consumer is really interested in these things. So companies will
Right.
align with those things in order
That
to get those consumers.
that
I
to me
mean,
screams free, like a free market.
free
And
market
um,
economy,
right.
but not their free market economy.
No.
Their free market economy is the people who don't want to do that peer pressure, but still want their own consumers. That it could potentially be, I believe the accusation is that it could potentially be deemed illegal
Right.
because it breaks a free market, that all the consumers are doing all the things that all that society has decided it likes.
Right.
So then it's cheating the
And
organizations who chose not to do those things. Possibly, I'm just going to go, it doesn't say this, but possibly because of their religious affiliations or expression or whatever, that's the illegalness. So
and
if you take
yeah,
all your money to companies that are like LGBT friendly, you're
right.
breaking the law by discriminating against a company that is openly homophobic. I think that's the
Right.
premise.
Right. And right. And so two things on that. Um, to to follow on that point exactly, it would void his last point of saying that small businesses are the foundation to the American free market system, because the Small Business Administration specifically ensures that, I mean, there are opportunities for people with diverse identities to be supported as a small business in
Mhm.
that capacity. And so, the fact that he doesn't bring that up, obviously that's not the point of the chapter. But then the second point I was going to say, just to tie in everything that we've already talked about, is the fact that when we think about, um, you know, social progress and all of the progressive ideals that are discussed and weaved into the fabric of what people consider to be right and wrong. It seems to be often the case that when intellectuals or policymakers try to demonize these, I mean, this emerging or underpowered system, DEI work, ESG concepts, they do so in a way where they're leaving out such obvious counterpoints against why
Mhm.
many of these arguments aren't true. And I will say that the one major component that hasn't been brought up in this chapter, that that ought to be the main focus of uh, antitrust topics, is our defense contractors
Mhm.
and the defense military industrial complex. I mean, we have defense contractors, I mean, working with billions of dollars. Um, and that is not brought up a single time in this chapter. And
Mhm.
so it's so interesting to me that an intellectual or a so-called intellectual lawyer will demonize DEI work as this really unfair system when he hasn't even paid any attention to the fact that defense contractors are the ones that are using our money in the worst way possible. So, okay.
If it is helpful, the defense chapter does talk about getting rid of all the contractors. Or
Oh,
that might actually be the bureaucracy duplication chapter. I think it's chapter 3.
that's why
Yeah,
you're the whole thing, and I'm so glad I get to talk to you about
yeah.
this.
So that does get mentioned. Get rid of all contractors. But the word that they actually use is collusion.
Right,
And that there is a collusion between the current federal government, social media companies to, again, my head is exploding, right?
right, I
Stroke,
know.
stroke enough. But the collusion between a liberal federal government, a liberal social media company, which I'd like to point out is a private company. They can do, remember how much we like private
Exactly.
companies?
I mean,
That is distorting information. Huh. Funny. What's funny is I'd never even thought about misinformation or disinformation campaigns or alternative facts. Those things had never crossed my mind because I am naive and believe there is one sense of truth. But you know who taught me there isn't? Heritage Foundation. Anyway, the collusion between these private businesses that are liberal,
right,
the federal
right.
government that is liberal, to construe or constrain information access. Also, these are the people who are getting rid of net neutrality. So again,
Yes.
what? Um,
Oh my
but
gosh.
also state regulatory things that are supporting abortion, health, whatever medical clinics that uses that as an example is part of this collusion.
Right.
So, different chapter when we're talking about abortion, DHHS, they actually talk about abortion tourism, which I understand that blank tourism gets used a lot, like disaster tourism is that you go and like see what happened after the fires in LA. I understand this. I get the premise, and we need to be mindful that like you're touring something that was incredibly catastrophic and painful. So to call it abortion tourism is a little ouchy for me,
How
but
does it even work?
because people the this is another one of the things. So disaster tourism would be people who go to Katrina to see what it looks like
Okay.
after the hurricane. They're not
Okay.
helping. They're just, and maybe
So,
even sometimes they might want to help, but now they're like extra mouths to feed. I remember when the big earthquake happened in Nepal, my partner was going to go to Nepal. They used to live in Nepal. They speak Nepali. So then they thought they would go and just be helpful, but then they realized they're another mouth to feed. They need shelter. They have to go to the bathroom. So not going might actually be more helpful, but they also spoke Nepali, knew the terrain, etc. So it could be helpful, could be. You got to decide, right? So abortion tourism are people who are voluntarily leaving states to go to other states to receive life-saving medical care that is in cahoots with the liberal state regulations. Social media is being used as the network to communicate with everyone
the
because,
mental gymnastics.
yeah, but they can do that. They could do that in straight face. But like, can I have a citation for possible criminal behavior? No, that's the same chapter. Like, okay, I'm trying really hard to be charitable here, but like, honey, use an
Um,
editor. What are you talking about? Okay, more stuff. Shareholders don't decide business contracts. This is Milton Friedman. Stakeholders should be involved in business decisions. Now, this fundamental thing, I get this. I wrote a paper on this when I got my MBA. So here's the premise. I'm ruining before I even give you the premise. Invest your money elsewhere. You have freedom of choice. There you go. That's the answer. But I'm being Hannah Gadsby. I started at the end. Let's start at the beginning. So if shareholders invest money in a business and this business decides to do some loop-de-boop and like, accept corporate social responsibility or some ESG priority or something, shareholders
criminal.
didn't get to say, I'm on for this or I'm not on for this, and they've already invested their money. So they could divest if they don't like what the company is doing. Interestingly, my entire retirement is only invested in companies that I like what they are doing. But that's not what Milton Friedman said. So Milton Friedman said, you give your money away, and then the shareholder has no idea what is being done to its money. So here's the claim. So the business owner can't do anything with that money without running it through whoever it gave them the money. So I'm going to go on a limb and just say,
Oof.
okay, okay. If at one point in time in my life I bought my brother a car. This is me attempting to be charitable, so please get a beverage. I bought my brother a car.
Got my coffee.
I bought myself a car as well. I had just moved to Arizona from New York. I bought him a car. He was homeless at the time and didn't have a car and was like trying to get his life together. So I bought him a car. So I flew him to Arizona and he got the car. And then he told me he doesn't know how to drive a stick. And I was like, well, you have about a 700-mile drive to figure it out. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I didn't ask any of the specifics. He didn't tell me any of the specifics, and we figured it out. There is something connected there into the premise that shareholders don't get to decide what the business is doing or what contracts it signs or what it does or doesn't decide to do because they are just given a report about return on investment. The irony is that if those business decisions were discussed with investors, then they would become stakeholders in those business decisions. And now we've slippery sloped back into this definition that's focusing on something other than ROI for investors. Right? Like if
So
stakeholders,
your
if
brother would be a principal voter because he
right,
bought a car.
he received the car, I paid for the car. But if for this to not be comical, it would have been good to have a conversation to find out I don't know how to drive a stick prior to the acquisition of said car.
But I'm going to still vote on where the company goes.
Right. And that company does not care. They sold me a car. Right. My brother thinks I was, or thought I was the coolest thing in the whole world because I bought him a car. And for the record, he figured out how to drive a stick between Arizona and Ohio. Nailed it. Stakeholders, the premise is that they're much more involved in those business decisions, which I think also leads to like transparency, accountability, more meaningful stake in a surrounding community. Who wants that?
Right. So and actually, so speaking of shareholders, the bottom paragraph before cancel culture, collusion, and commerce on page
A
870.
personal favorite.
Yes. Uh, Adam writes, managers who insert their own values into underwriting agreements, contracts for professional services, or other business transactions co-opt shareholder value for their own personal utility. So I just like, how can you write that on paper? Like if,
Because your priorities are different.
right,
They're
if,
just making a profit.
but I mean, to say that you can't have any like value or I mean I'm a mission driven person, so this is where just my mind starts glitching. But if Steve Jobs, when he created Apple, or sorry, when he when he assumed the main creative genius behind Apple, he he was such a values driven person to ensure that his vision of what the company looked like would be successful. Doing that means, in Adam's perception, that it's an unfair trade practice. Quote, particularly when it occurs in industries that enjoy market power and special privileges or relationships with the government. I like, then what would you be? Like, do you like, does Adam expect that people who want to create businesses and businesses regulated by the FTC are these mindless robots that, in his words, I'm just going to do business because business is business and not ideology. It's just like
Right.
it's
Well, I think you're asking a really smart question. So I'm going to pull from the document. This is why it's annoying. I've read the whole thing. From the document, when we're talking about interglobal trade and exchange,
Mm.
right? So Boeing is often picked up as one of the biggest companies in the US that is getting all kinds of special privileges. Sometimes the privileges are even referred to as like the Bank of Boeing because they're the number one airplane producer in the United States. So,
Well,
fun facts sounds to me like that could be a blooming monopoly. And one of the things that they're talking about is increasing growth and opportunity, flight schedules, etc. So, like another company could easily have come along to build airplanes to compete with Boeing built airplanes, but that hasn't happened. It could, and that's what a free market economy does, but it hasn't happened because they're the best at building airplanes. So, okay, let's just put a pin in that reality. So, a deal was worked out between Rolls-Royce, which I think is it in England? Is that correct?
yeah, I believe so. If
Insert
not, no.
European country here.
Yeah.
Rolls-Royce engines are the only engines that are used inside of a Boeing airplane.
Mm,
That is called a free market economy. Right?
right.
That like an agreement was made between this country and this country that this is how they're going to do this for all airplanes. So Boeing, without it being purchased by an airline, it's just the thing. It
Hmm.
makes the thing,
The
and then in that
brands.
thing is this is the people who make the engines. I'm willing to bet that there is an upholstery company. There
Yes.
is a light bulb company. Like they're getting their parts from certain places, and those are business choices
Right.
that the company gets to make.
Right. And according to Adam, let's just make sure that they don't have a mission statement.
Oh yeah, no emission statements, heaven forbid. Um,
That would be unfair if you had a value attached to all those free
well then
market.
you're getting because you're getting into ideologies.
Right.
Right. So the last main point of this chapter is to give the FTC authority, interest, and duty to censor the internet,
Right.
big tech platforms under the guise of protecting children from
Oh, yeah.
exposure to
His
leftist liberal
expertise.
content.
Yeah.
Right. I know. He's fucking in there, right? Like that is his expertise. So if it seems a little like whoop, just like talking about Boeing airplanes, and all of a sudden we get to like leftist liberal content on social media, which again
Right.
is a private company. Private
So,
company.
yeah. Hmm.
These agreements, whether it be Boeing and Rolls Royce or um, individual users of a Facebook account, which, according to the free market economy, the way that these private social media platforms work is that they are the producer or the user is the producer. They are merely the
Right.
distributor. And there's an agreement that they will distribute what is being produced by its users. That is the business agreement. So when Facebook just came out and said, we're not going to fact check anything, you can call gay people mentally ill, knock yourself out. It's technically up to us to police truth, right? Like we shouldn't need, I agree with the Supreme Court. We should not need voter watchdogs. We should not need affirmative action. We should not need the Civil Rights Act. I love that world. Let's live in that world. But we don't live in that world. We may at some point live in that world, but we do not currently live in that world. But if we could give the FTC the authority, the interest, and the duty to protect our children, isn't that another ideology that just tumbled into this Friedman based ROI shareholders? Why are we
So,
even talking about children? Like where
so
did
say,
that come from?
yeah. So say that one more time, that question.
The, just the stumbling into what is an ideology, what is not an ideology, what is an assumption about what is happening
Right.
and what isn't happening and whose responsibility is it to like clean it up. Um,
Well, my short answer is maybe he ran out of creative room and had to fall back on his previous legal
right.
rights that were.
Oh shit, I need a fourth bullet.
Yeah. Well, yes, and I think it's also just so naive to assume that okay, you know what, in a perfectly unfiltered, online system, we're going to say, oh, it's so beautiful that we can all just police each other and it's just going to be kumbaya, except for the fact that in Mark Zuckerberg's frat boy speech, where did you see that? He had his like, he had this chain on and he was like, we got to make sure that we're all, you know, going back to the basics. It was really, anyway. So in that system, though, he did not say anything about the fact that algorithms for our attention would be scaled back as well. We can't regulate ourselves in this perfect utopian way when the only people that we're really regulating are ourselves or the in-groups that we're being placed in based on an algorithm that is only being strengthened by the day. And so to say that, oh, okay, well, we're just gonna, well, and you're right, like, and then, oh, but let's protect the children. Like, what?
Right.
Where did we jump to? So
But it doesn't it sound good? Like, I mean, what
it
kind of
does sound good.
asshole would it be like, oh no, 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 we shouldn't be protecting children?
You
Like,
have, yeah, you have to end your chapter on the FTC by saying, let's protect the children. Because because if you don't, why write the chapter at all? Anyway, so
right.
I also think too when it comes to censorship, the probably the easiest, and that's a little bit I mean, one of the easiest stories or things that you can cite right now, um, in combination with many other stories going on right now in pop culture, is the Hunter Biden laptop story thing.
Mhm.
So on page 878, uh, the bottom paragraph, again, no citation, but Adams says the dominant internet platforms have disrupted democratic deliberation. Okay, you could argue for that. Again, like to
I
give,
would probably agree with that,
yeah,
actually. Yeah.
absolutely. Exactly. So I was going to say, you can take many points with that, like misinformation. Absolutely. So many things have disrupted democratic deliberation. But I love how the last half of that sentence is, as evidenced by the Hunter Biden laptop story.
Right.
It's like, it's like, and no citation, you know?
Right.
So you've got this huge big claim that I agree with, but then you're just going to be like, society is crumbling based on the
Mhm.
Hunter Biden laptop story. It's like,
Yeah.
what?
Well, I think that this is a really good time to kind of talk about like what are we going to do with this
Right.
information. So,
Yeah, absolutely.
um, I often say that when I same brother am talking to him and his interesting QAnon conspiracy theories, right? Is that again to be charitable? I believe conspiracy theories are like glaciers, right?
Right.
That they displace rubble in places where you didn't see it coming, and then it connects the dots, and it's comforting, right? It's really comforting to have an answer.
Right.
Um, okay, great. I mean, if we take 9/11, I think it is actually very comforting to some people that that was an inside job than understanding that we are loathed on the globe for our own imperialism and colonialism. That
Yeah, and
is too much to grasp. How about crazy people did it from the inside?
it
Somehow that's
yeah.
more palatable, right?
Well, and have you heard of and just to interject real quick, well, yeah, and at first it gives it sometimes I almost feel like it gives credence to the fact that, oh, well, we weren't actually ignorant, we weren't defenseless, we were just really the government was just manipulative. Like
Right.
we're you know,
We didn't
and
do anything wrong.
right, right. And recently, have you heard of this? Like yesterday, I just started reading about it, but people are on the bandwagon now about the fact that the LA fires were created to make way to build infrastructure for I think it's the 2028 Olympics or something. It's this, I know, 2038 or 2028 smart city. And it's bizarre. Like people are saying, look, they want to build a smart city. There's no evidence to support that burning down people's lives is part of the plan, but people are saying, okay, well, this makes sense to me because natural catastrophe is too disturbing for me to look at. So I'm just going to like pretend that there's evil masterminds behind everything to create something that I don't want.
Right.
Anyway, so
Right. Same thing that when there's earthquakes not near fault lines, and people are like, "Oh yeah, yeah, because fracking is good." And you're like, it seems disruptive. All right. I went off on a tangent,
sorry, that
and
was,
we're all
yeah,
good. We're all in the same. What the hell is
yeah,
happening? Okay, so what can normal people do
right,
sitting at their dinner table? Right.
yes.
So one of the things that I would challenge is as a market consumer,
Mhm.
here's your homework assignment. What are your favorite brands? Who owns that brand? Right? Like Burt's Bees chapstick is no longer an independent, cutie little hippie company. It's been purchased, I think, by Unilever, maybe. I don't know that. I just made that up. Someone's going to fact
I
check
wouldn't
that.
be surprised. Yeah.
Yeah. So, of your favorite brands, who owns them?
Mhm.
And is there, are you ready for this? An ideology that you like?
What?
I know. Is there an ideology that you don't like? So I'm going to pick Nike as an example. Nike is a perfect example of an American business in a lot of ways. And what I mean is they came up with like a pride shoe, right?
Not always, but yes.
All kinds of gay money. Oh, no, no, I'm going there. All kinds of gay money. Very exciting. Kaepernick take a knee, right? Like we're going to take a stand on this. They
Right.
made a shit ton of money from a liberal ideology and then donated that money to conservative political groups.
Don't you mean the deep state, Jess?
Well, those are lizards. Different.
Right.
Um, so what are the brands that you like? And whether you want to call it an ideology or a mission, do you like what that company stands for? And
Mm,
then here's the existential question I was going to ask. If you do or don't like, let's say that you don't like what the company stands for, whatever that is, right? And it gets to do that because it's a company, whatever. But you don't like what it stands for. Does it matter if you like the product? Will you use the product if you don't like what the company stands for?
mm,
Um, I'm not, there's no value judgment there. I just think we need to be conscious of it.
huge.
Well, if I find out that one of my favorite brands is doing something that I really disagree with, there is a very good chance that I will just not use that brand anymore, which is my choice as a consumer.
Hmm.
But I'm curious. Again, we're just like practicing things, right? If acts of resistance don't have to be sexy activism, but are there brands I'm so loyal to that I would use them even if I knew bad things about them? Which is different than like I'm gonna eat me some Swiss rolls even though I know they're terrible for me. Like I don't want to read the nutritional value of a Tony's pizza roll. Thank you very much. Um, I don't mean that, right? I mean like does this company do
Right.
something that I disagree with and I like the product enough that I'm going to continue using it. And then maybe advanced classes the other way around. That you find a company you didn't know about their products, so you start using them and you don't like it as much, but you like what the company stands for. I think of I call it hippie laundry detergent. I like Tide. I like Tide. I like Tide. And I won the battle in the house because number one, I do the laundry. And number two, instead of using dryer sheets, which are really bad for the environment, I get to use Tide, but not dryer sheets. That was the balance.
And they might have good nutritious value too. You never know if that.
Yeah, I don't like the hippie detergent because I don't think it gets the clothes cleaned. And maybe
Yeah.
it does, but I don't like it. But
Well,
can we become more conscious consumers? I guess that's my homework assignment. What's yours?
yeah. So what I really appreciate, Jess, about this these series is that we there's a call to do an intervention, and it's something that I feel really passionate about. You know, even to grow awareness is an intervention. So media literacy is an intervention. Um, Helping people wade through the mess of information that we're bombarded with every day so that they can be better
Informed.
decision makers, right? And, I'm sure companies would like to say, well, we want you to be better consumers, but better decision makers is, I mean, optimal. And so I think that just in reflection of what I've been hearing throughout our conversation, and even my recent pursuits with my own business, I would say that my homework for myself and also in conversation with other people is to say, okay, any company that you interact with, especially social media sites, are you noticing any value that the company wants to communicate, or is it, the company in Milton Friedman's or Adam's description, just a business for business enterprise? And I think
Mhm.
anyone can be critical, reflective um, thinkers when they allow themselves to find the space to do that. And you can approach thinking about businesses in that way too. You know, so I'm on the same page with you with just let's have a better awareness of whether or not I agree with the values of the company that I buy products from, but in another way too, it's am I going to be sold on a day-to-day basis that business is business because business is the most important thing that I will hold dear to me for the rest of my
Mhm.
life? Or is there something more to life than just seeing, well, the business of American dream business is the only way. So I think my homework is to constantly be critical, even in my current employment now, on asking those questions. Are we doing something more here, or is this just for a profit? And you don't have to be a liberal, communist to be critical in that way, to say, do I want to contribute something more here, or am I okay being a part of a business for business, just for business
Mhm.
life?
Well, I think it's a really profound ideological examination.
Oh,
And
shoot. No.
I know, but I'm going to throw out too is that I think we can also just be conscious consumers, and we can also be like, I don't want to die on this hill. I just want this thing, right? I would challenge
Right.
too, like I haven't stepped foot in a Walmart
Yeah.
in 100,000 years. I'm going to be really honest. I can't even remember why. Why did I stop going to Walmart? I don't know, but I do. But it's my responsibility to become conscious of why I've made that choice. Um, and it more than likely had to do with non-discrimination policies and the treatment of their employees. How are
Right.
they doing now? Is it still the same? I don't even know, right?
Right. Not
So
better.
can I become more conscious of the choices I make to do and more conscious of the choices I have made to not do? And can I just become conscious that I'm at least a consumer,
Right. Oh my
right? Like
gosh. Just,
I'm a
yeah.
consumer that is creating waste
It's,
and is making choices. Like, can I sit in that? And I think that honestly is the biggest act of resistance we can make around the non
oh,
ideology of the Federal Trade Commission.
that's a great place to end too, because I think when you read this chapter, it sort of makes the point that even Adam isn't aware that he's this like consumer, because he's
Mm-hmm.
writing from a perspective that, you know, I need to make sure that I'm falling in line with a more free market consumption lens so that I can benefit the capitalist machine. But
Mm-hmm.
there's no conversation of, okay, how am I a part of it? And what are ways that I'm able to maybe be different, right? You don't even have to take it further than that. It's just like absolutely what you said, just consciousness. Can I be
Mm-hmm.
conscious of what I'm doing?
Can we bring consciousness to this? Well, as usual, Thomas, it's a gem and a joy to get to know you and get to talk to you about these crazy chapters. Thank you
Likewise.
very much. And I don't know, maybe I'll wrangle and twist your arm to get you to do another one.
And I'm so yes, and I'm so happy I get to consider our four-legged furry friends as shareholders now.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, they certainly don't have an ideology. They're very self-serving. Thanks, y'all.